Yeah, he got started in Memphis in the late 80s as Lord Humongous. And from there, he spent a little bit of time in Continental. And this was the Eddie Gilbert period when Eddie Gilbert was booking Continental. And they had him in there as Lord Humongous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously where he ran into Paul Heyman, because Paul Heyman was Gilbert's assistant booker down there. And, a lot of the guys that Paul Heyman would bring into ECW later were relationships that he forged early in his career, either guys that he met in Continental or guys that he met when he was booking Windy City Wrestling, or guys like 911, who was working as, I know he was Tombstone Al later. I forget what he was prior to that when Heyman booked him originally in the late 80s. But the point is here, I think that, that's probably where Heyman and Sid, that's where they first crossed paths and established their relationship.
Yeah.
In that run of Continental, which was, for the hardcore fans of the era, for the smarks of the era, everybody loves that little 6-month period of Continental when Eddie Gilbert was booking things with Heyman down there, and Lord Humongous was a part of that. He had the tag team with Shane Douglas, and because he split with Lord Humongous, he was with Detroit Demolition, and I think it was Randy Cully, right? It was Moondog. Which Moondog is Randy Cully? Spot or Rex? I think it's Spot. And then,
I think so. Yeah,
also that, yeah. So as a heel, but then he went babyface and teamed with Shane Douglas and feuded with Detroit Demolition, and that was kind of his big storyline in Continental Sid. So basically, what it was is it was a sort of a takeoff from Mad Max, right? It's like a Mad Max character with the Jason hockey mask and because he was this imposing, legit 6'9", whatever he was, with that incredible body, because he had the bodybuilder steroid physique. And I don't think he was Sid Vicious until he made that pit stop in Texas, right?
Correct.
Think that's where, in the dying days of, right,
World Class,
and that's where he first, that's where the dying days of World Class. That's where he picked up the Sid Vicious moniker before he hooked up with WCW in 1989. And I think that's where a lot of fans also pick up on him, as they brought him in, with the skyscraper gimmick with Dan Spivey, which was, now this is my favorite era of Sid.
Oh yeah. We should real quickly mention his very brief New Japan run, which is actually very fascinating too, because they brought this guy in because Bruiser Brody died. Bruiser Brody was murdered, and they said, fuck, we need another Gaijin. We need a big fucking giant Gaijin. We need to get somebody. So they brought Sid in. I forget where the connection came from or how New Japan found out about Sid. I don't recall who made that connection. But essentially, Inoki said, watch Brody tapes and do that. Essentially, it's what he told Sid Vicious to do. And he comes in and immediately, like right out of the gates, challenges Tatsumi Fujinami for the IWGP Heavyweight title. Vicious Warrior was his name there. Yeah. And he did not actually win that contest. He did not win the IWGP title.
Inoki had to get in there and beat him too.
Oh, of course. So, yeah. And then he said, hold on, big man, go over here. And then Inoki, beat him too. And then he went back and I don't think ever wrestled in Japan ever again. That was his one and only stint in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Are those, I don't know if those are even, I don't know if I've ever seen those matches, to be honest.
I've never seen him in those New Japan
matches.
I
wonder how much of those are available.
Some of them must have hit tape at some point, but I've never seen them.
Yeah.
Just for posterity, Detroit Demolition was in fact Randy Cully, who was Moondog Rex, not Spot. And the Detroit Demolition gimmick was just a total ripoff of the WWF Demolition gimmick, because Randy Cully was the first Demolition Smash for a couple of matches there before they replaced him, because
it was his gimmick too, man. That I always find that just, he's like, hey, I got this cool idea. We'll be these guys and we come out with this, and they're like, yeah, cool gimmick, brother. Yeah, we don't need you anymore. We're gonna replace you.
Yeah, but it really wasn't okay. Because so what happened was the fans were recognizing him and catcalling him.
Right. They knew who he was. They knew he wasn't.
So it just wasn't working. So I don't even think he cared. I could be wrong, but I don't even think he cared that he was replaced in the team. It was just, these guys go through gimmicks, man, and it's like, all right, well, someone else is a better fit, and they brought in Crusher Khrushchev, Barry Darsow, to take over the role. But then he took the gimmick, he took the look and the gimmick to Continental and other places as Detroit Demolition. And, was teaming with Lord Humongous on the heel side. And then they feuded against each other when Lord Humongous went babyface. I think I'm getting this timeline right. I just watched all this stuff like a few months ago when I was doing the Gilbert doc. But and Vicious or Lord Humongous was teaming with Shane Douglas on the babyface side, right before he left the company. But so then, as we said, the WCW run in '89, which led to the New Japan run that Rich was talking about, comes in as one half of the Skyscrapers, managed by Teddy Long, Dan Spivey, and Sid Vicious. This is my personal favorite era of Sid Vicious, the Skyscraper era and the early Horseman era. The double singlet look, right? Like that's the Sid that really connect. Because what you have to understand about Sid in this era, 89, 90, he was just the coolest motherfucker. Because look at him. Okay, everyone who laid their eyes on this guy was like, he's going to be the next biggest star in pro wrestling.
And he was instantly a babyface too. Like they tried to make them kind of heels, but Sid would do some cool fucking move to some jobber and then do that thing where he'd get down on his one knee and kind of go like, bask in the cheers.
Soak it in.
And everybody cheered him every single time to the point where they're like, all right, I guess he's just a babyface. Because it's like you couldn't make him a heel. And that was a problem throughout his entire career because he was so fucking cool that it happened in WWF too. Madison Square Garden, the famous 1996 we'll get to in a minute, but you just couldn't make this guy a heel because every time you made him a heel, most times the fans just said, this guy fucking rocks. We're going to cheer this guy. And that's what happened during the Skyscrapers run. These two dudes would come out from Metropolis and just beat the fuck out of jobbers and beat them up so cool and be so cool about it that the fans were just rooting for them, even though they were technically supposed to be heels, but it just didn't work out because they were just so perfect and you couldn't not be attracted. And Sid more than Dan Spivey. It was like Sid would get in the ring and you're like, yeah, that dude is going to be the biggest star in wrestling in a couple years.
Yeah, it was, Spivey was the experienced guy in the team. And they put him on the road with Davey and Johnny Rich, who were two guys, underneath guys who, from the dying days of the territories, who had been in a lot of different places and who they trusted could work with this guy who they just knew had everything except, here we go, the work, and he was a little clumsy and he was a little awkward, but his matches were kept short and sweet, and as long as he just powerbombed people and looked menacing, he could get over, and the Skyscrapers were just a cool as fuck act that, like Rich said, got over despite being heels, especially in WCW in those days. WCW fans were more apt to cheer for whoever the fuck they wanted versus WWF fans who were generally going to stick with cheering the baby faces and booing the heels. And it was a little more cartoonish up there at that time. Whereas WCW fans, it was more of a hardcore insider smarky fan base. And they were just going to like who they liked. A lot of cities were horseman cities. And, even going back to the mid 80s, where some cities they were going to root for the horsemen. I tell this story all the time, like right around the time where Sid, a 1991 Meadowlands house show that I went to, where Barry Windham and Arn Anderson as the horsemen versus the wild-eyed Southern boys in East Rutherford, New Jersey. What do you think happened, Rich? They rooted for the fucking horsemen. They weren't going to root for the wild-eyed Southern boys. And Arn and Barry were the most over people on that show until Flair came out, and it's like, and then, I've told this story a million times, and Sid was on that show. Midstream, all four of those guys who were, understood what was happening. You have Tracy Smothers and Steve Armstrong and Arn Anderson. These guys are smart workers. They immediately recognized it, and the Horsemen just worked babyface, and the Southern boys worked heel because they went with the crowd, And so yeah, the point is, a lot of these crowds, particularly the WCW crowds, we're gonna root for who they fucking wanted to, and the Skyscrapers, like the Road Warriors, a half generation before them, who could never get over his heels because everybody just wanted to cheer them because they were so cool. That was kind of the same dynamic. So, eventually though, I did. You always think it's kind of like this Hollywood Blondes thing. You think these teams existed for so long, and it really wasn't. The Skyscrapers didn't even barely existed a year. Now I know they kept going with Spivey and Mark Callis, but Sid was out of that act and with the Horsemen, in a little less than a year, maybe 10, 11 months.
Just about that.
Like
yeah.
that.
Yeah. Shockingly. So, yeah. It was like June 89, I think I looked at. And then they were pretty much done by man, what was it
Well,
like?
Sid. Well, he got hurt, and they replaced him with Callis.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when he got hurt. Sometime October, November, somewhere. It's like shockingly short amount of time.
When he came back, they put him in the Horsemen.
Right.
He was back in like
early
mid-90.
1990. Yeah, early 1990.
And then they programmed him with Luger, and after that he was programmed with Sting, and then there was that awful Halloween Havoc angle. I think Halloween Havoc 90.
1990, yeah, with the fake Sting, Barry Windham, and Sid pinned one of the Stings, and then if you were live in the audience, you had no fucking idea what was going on, and even on commentary. I did that. There's a review of that show over at flagshippatreon.com if you want to listen to it, but it's a fucking disaster. It's horrible, and like Tony Schiavone doesn't know what's going on. Nobody knows what's going on, and it's just we go to or Jim Ross. I think it was Jim Ross at that time. I think Tony was in WWF at the time, but it's just a terrible thing. They had Sid pin a fake Sting. It was all dumb. It was very stupid.
It was Barry Windham in Sting's gear and paint.
Right. Which, by the way, it was not very convincing Sting. Won 1990 Barry Windham. A little fatter than Sting was at that time. It's like Barry Windham comes out. You could very clearly tell that it's not Sting. It's some other guy, but you know what I mean.
It was the Horseman trying to steal the title from Sting.
Right.
And then the real so Sid wins. And then the real Sting comes out from the back, and then they have another match, and Sting successfully defends the title. That's the thing about Sid's early run, that initial run. He never won any titles. You know, he did a ton of jobs to Luger, and then they moved him into the world title program with Sting, and he was never able to win the world title from Sting. I know that Sid, and again, Sid's a little bit of an eclectic guy. You know, he claims that he didn't know that they were doing the deal with Windham in disguise, and he claims he was as shocked as anyone, and it's like, that's impossible. I mean, that's not even that doesn't make any sense. No, that he like you know, he said, I couldn't believe they sent the real Sting out. They told me they were doing the deal and putting the title on me. Like, what? That's not even possible. So it's like that's impossible.
He didn't think it was weird when he was pinning Barry Windham and not Steve Borden?
Yeah, so I don't know, but that's always the story that he would tell. But yeah, and that basically took him through 90, and then in 91 he got across. You know, once Vince got his eyes on that guy, you know, he was going to want Sid. Get a hold of him.
And that was a guy that was ready made for that company at that time too. And it was just like, yeah, the second he was quote unquote ready to go, you knew that Vince and you could read I was going back and reading old Observers and stuff too, and it was like even before he signed there, it was like Dave would write, you know, oh my God, if Vince McMahon obviously would love to have a guy like Sid in his company. And of course, yeah, he makes a big, huge money offer to Sid and gets him, and Sid jumps.
Yeah, so there's two different versions of the story. And at this point, it's like WCW's gun shy, and they've never put a single title on him. Not a tag team title. He never was able to win the U.S. title from Luger. They never had the guts to just pull the trigger and have him beat Sting. So, you know, it's like, because Sid was kind of, you know, I don't know another word I could use other than a little flaky. You know, he wanted to go play his softball. He was kind of difficult to deal with, according to a lot of people. So by mid 91, like you said, Vince made him the offer. Now, the two different versions are he was either already under contract with WCW for about $400,000 a year, which is enormous money now and was even bigger money 35 years ago or whatever it was, 33 years ago. And Vince made him the offer, and then he went to Jim Herd, and Jim Herd let him out of the deal. The other version, and I've heard Jim Cornette tell this version of the story, was Sid had some demands for Herd. He said he wanted the $400,000 contract, and Herd gave it to him. He wanted the world title, and Herd agreed. He said, we'll put the world title on you if you stay. And he also wanted off every summer to play softball. And Jim Herd wouldn't agree to that. He's like, well, I can't go that far. I can't give you off every summer. So either way, either version, either he was choosing between WCW's offer and Herd wouldn't acquiesce to all of his demands, or he was already under contract at WCW and Herd just decided, you know what, this guy's a pain in the ass, I'm just going to let him out of the deal. The point is, he ended up signing with Vince. And his final match was that infamous stretcher match against El Gigante, where Sid lost, even though One Man Gang was the one taken out on the stretcher. So that's like total, modern, TNA booking, or, just awful. Cause Sid obviously didn't want to do the job. Now, I don't think Sid respected El Gigante as a wrestler.
No, that is the most that is one of the most disrespectful matches you will ever see. It's about 2 minutes. Sid lays down for, the 1, 2, 3, and then immediately gets up, walks out of the ring, and he's out. He just goes to the back and decides, all right, I'm out of here. Bye-bye. And what's funny too is WCW knew that he wasn't going to do business the right way and basically took him off the road for the month leading up to the show. So he basically wasn't on the road, popped up to do this one job, did the 2-minute job, and then immediately walked out of the ring and didn't sell a thing and got out of there and did not, like you said, get taken out on the stretcher whatsoever.
Quote unquote job. I mean,
right.
He didn't,
right.
Another man got taken out on the stretcher and that was the finish. It's just, but they didn't have any leverage on him at that point. And again, I don't think he really respected El Gigante. I've heard him speak about El Gigante, and he always talked about how, sort of in defending himself, in that, because all big men think that big men should be on top in wrestling. That's like a time-tested, axiom. So, in defending that idea, Sid would say, "But if you are a big man, you got to know how to work." And that El Gigante, he couldn't draw money because he couldn't, you couldn't do much with him. And he's not that he was wrong. I mean, you couldn't do anything with El Gigante.
He's right.
He was the shits. He was awful. But even Sid was like, this guy can't go.
This guy sucks.
It's like, so, and he's right. That's why El Gigante didn't ever draw any money, because he couldn't, all he had was the sides.
The spider chart is 10 out of 10 size and 0 out of 0 on every
and
other
0
part.
on everything else.
Other part of wrestling. Yeah.
He had brought nothing to the table. So, that's how Sid exited the company. And it's really funny when you look at that run, because as I was the prime age for when Sid entered WCW to just think he was the coolest motherfucker in the universe, hailing from anywhere he damn well pleases, which was just a tremendous introduction. And then he would just go in there and powerbomb people and just look like a fucking, like a god. The guy looked like a superhero.
They always shot him on his entrances. They always had the low camera shot or whatever, and they put him in there with really short jobbers too. So it just made him look all that more menacing and giant and larger than life, and it was just perfect. They just nailed it.
He looked like he'd be a Superman villain.
Yeah,
he that's what he looked like. He looked, like someone who would oppose Superman in a comic book. He looked like an evil. What do you call an evil superhero? He looked like a super villain. What do you call?
Yeah, a super villain. Yeah, like a villain. Comic book villain.
He looked like a heel in a comic book. Is what he. And he was just the coolest fucking thing. But you look at that run, and they never put titles on him when putting titles on people mattered. And they never pulled the trigger. And he went to WWE in '91 as Sid Justice, and the way he tells it is that he was pitched one thing by Vince in terms of doing a program with Hogan. The idea was he was always going to go heel at some point and then have the big money feud with Hogan. But then the way he tells it is that Hogan ripped up those plans and changed his mind and didn't want to do it the way that Vince laid it out, which honestly is kind of believable.
Sounds about right. Yeah. Hogan has been known to do that 1 or 2 or 10 times. Yeah.
Well, because I could see Hogan being threatened by him.
Absolutely, certainly. Well, especially you brought this guy in, and one of the things, I had this in my piece as well at LinkedIn. I'd never seen this before, but when he was debuting, WWF would run vignettes of other wrestlers talking about how awesome Sid was, and that's unique. You usually don't get that. And it's like a 7-minute thing, and it's a compilation. It's up on YouTube, and it was multiple different segments across different TVs or whatever. But it would be like the LOD being like, "Wow, this Sid is a hell of a wrestler." You know what I mean? And it's like so weird. They're putting this guy over, and like the natural disasters talking about how we're big, but this guy is huge, and Mr. Perfect saying, very few guys are perfect, but this guy is pretty perfect. It's wild. And it's like, man, you realize that Vince saw maybe, and I'm sure Hogan knew this too. Vince saw, this guy is my future. Because look, Vince was always very, very often, and this happened for years and years and years and years. Vince was ready to move on from Hogan by 1990. Ultimate Warrior was the first kind of, okay, we've done the Hogan thing for 5 years now. Again, imagine this in wrestling history. 5 years of Hulk Hogan doing massive business. Okay, we better figure out what's next before he stops doing business, for us. We got to figure out what we can do to build for the future. 5 years after Hogan debuts and does all the stuff. But that's how things worked in those days. So 1990 is the first attempt at, okay, the Ultimate Warrior is going to be our quote unquote new Hulk Hogan. And there were several new Hulk Hogans that would, Lex Luger would do it. And time and time again, they would have to go back to Hogan. But you can absolutely envision Vince McMahon seeing Sid and saying, yeah, that's my guy. And then when I watched these vignettes, I was like, yeah, they think that this guy is going to be their next biggest star. So much so they're going to have other people on the roster basically cut these vignettes about how fucking awesome Sid was as he was coming in. So I have no doubt in my mind that Hogan felt threatened by this guy, because how could you not? That guy was coming for your spot, for sure.
He came in as a babyface. The Sid Justice thing, as in real time, I hated it. I'm like, oh, Sid Justice, this is an awful name. Why is he a babyface? Where's the Sid Vicious that I loved in WCW? It was just that same typical, something is just cool in WCW, and then it's totally uncool when Vince gets his hands on it, right? But probably in some cases more digestible to the masses. I don't agree. In
Sid
this
Justice, that name still sucks. I will never.
So
awful. And then debuting as the special ref with the cutoffs and the stripes, and it was like, yeah.
Well, you forget before that he saved Randy Savage and Elizabeth from Jake Roberts and The Undertaker, and they had him go all
later
over
in the night.
loop.
Actually, no, later in the night. That was the main event. The wedding was the main event. Yes. That he gets refereed the handicap match, and then
before he ever wrestled. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. You're right. Yeah. And then what they did is they programmed him with The Undertaker and Jake Roberts on the road, and he was beating Undertaker on a nightly basis. That's how much they believed, how much Vince believed in him. Like casket matches, all kinds of shit. And beating Jake, who was kind of on the way out by then, but was pushed pretty hard at that time. Right after his heel turn with the Savage stuff and everything. So that kind of occupied Sid and helped get him over in front of the fans before the big angle at the Royal Rumble. The Royal Rumble's the big angle, at the end with Flair, Hogan, and Sid, where Sid throws out Hogan, and then Hogan Hogan then pulls Sid out, but with the help of Flair. Flair helps dump Sid.
Yeah. He so Sid tosses Hogan out. Very, very I mean, completely not any cheating or anything. He just
got cheered, by the way.
Yeah, he just picked him up and threw him out of the ring, and the crowd all went, yeah. Like I said, again, yet another example of Sid they try to make him a heel, but everybody's just like, yeah. So much so
rules.
That on all the WWF tapes and everything in the future, you would hear, cheers would be replaced, but the original tapes, if you ever do find that, it's very obvious that everybody's cheering for him, but they would turn it into boos
and booing Hogan.
Yeah, in post production.
So
then
Hogan,
yeah, and then Hogan, who's being a big fucking baby, is like, come on, man, what are you doing, man? What are you doing, brother? And Sid's just like, tough shit, man, Royal Rumble, then so Hogan just walks up and then reaches for Sid's arm, and Sid's kind of like, what are you doing? And then Flair comes from behind and tosses him out, and that's how Flair wins the 1992 Royal Rumble. So that kind of kickstarts the build to WrestleMania
Sid
with
Justice
Hogan and Sid. Yeah.
And that was a play on the WrestleMania 2 Battle Royal from, I guess, 6 years earlier. That's how Big John Studd, and they did the same thing with Big John Studd and Refrigerator Perry. The same Battle Royal spot where the one guy got thrown out and then the other guy pulled him out, right? So it was kind of like they repeated that same spot from, and I'm sure that spot's been done many other times, but in WWF canon, that was kind of a very similar spot to the WrestleMania 2 Battle Royal. So yeah, that kicked off the Sid program with Hogan. So they do the turn, and then Flair and Sid, basically work with Hogan and Piper all over the loop on the road, leading up to the WrestleMania match, which was Sid and Hogan with the fucked up finish, because it was, what's the best way to describe this? So they didn't want either guy to lose.
Right. So they didn't. What they did is they had Sid do his powerbomb, Hogan kicked out, and then Hogan eventually hit the leg drop on Sid. And then the idea was that Papa Shango was going to hit the ring and attack Hogan
and break it up
for the DQ. A little problem though is Papa Shango got there late, and Sid had to kick out of the leg drop, which I'm sure very much annoyed Hulk Hogan. And then that was all kind of, then Sid and Papa Shango were going to double team Hulk Hogan so the returning Ultimate Warrior could come to the ring and save the day after he was fired at SummerSlam 1991. So that was all.
And of course, that was where the urban legend started that the Ultimate Warrior was dead, and that it was actually Kerry Von Erich in the Warrior paint who made the save. That was
right.
Yeah. Which, by the way, put a pin in that. Put a pin in that for later on.
Yeah, I know where you're going here. It's nice. Yeah, it's good. Good little segue.
So the finish is all fucked up because Papa Shango was way late on the run in. There are some conspiracy theories that maybe Sid set that up with Charles Wright on purpose so he can kick out of Hogan's leg drop. I don't know if I buy that. I guess it's possible, but why would Papa Shango agree to that?
Yeah, this is Charles Wright, like very early into his career. I'm sure he's not trying to get fired or in trouble or anything. I mean, this is the biggest spot he'll ever be in.
Potentially something that could bury him with management, and why would he? How does that suit his interests to help Sid in that way for Sid to kick out of Hogan's leg drop? So I don't know if I buy that, but it was one of the worst finishes in WrestleMania main event history. I mean, it was an awful finish. I don't think it really accomplished much of anything for anyone. From there, this is where Sid starts chirping about, listen, this is not what was pitched to me when I signed, because now he's back working with The Undertaker again on the road. At this point, is Undertaker now a babyface?
This is yes. He turned babyface in early 1992. So yeah, he was a babyface by this point too. Yeah. So yeah, and also now we're doing the allegedly, and I think this has been confirmed by people, that Sid failed a drug test prior to the match with Hogan at WrestleMania. Right. But they allowed him to do the match and then said, oh, you can do a European tour and then, you're going to be suspended. We just need you to work Mania and then a long European tour. And then we're going to suspend you. And, on the European tour, he's working with Ultimate Warrior. And then Sid's and he just says, you know what? This shit sucks. I'm out of here.
Well, the European tour, he worked with Undertaker, but with reversed. And now he's the heel and Undertaker's the face.
Right.
When they got back from Europe, he worked with the Ultimate Warrior.
That's right. Yeah.
And then the way Sid tells it is that they did these short DQ matches, and he says that Warrior would tell him, all right, listen, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to basically the spot Warrior always did, where he was going to bounce off the ropes and give you a series of clotheslines. And then as the heel, you're going to take a powder. Right. And Sid was like, nah, that don't work for me, brother. How about I give you a clothesline and then I throw you in, and then you duck this clothesline, and then you clothesline me, and then I take a powder, right? Because I'm the heel, that makes me look like a bully. Like, when I'm in command, I'm okay. But as soon as you get some offense off on me, then I'm rolling out of the ring. And neither one of us, I look too weak if you just, beat the shit out of me and roll out. Which honestly makes sense.
Of course,
I mean, I agree with Sid.
But Warrior Warrior never really thought about wrestling on that high of a level.
Warrior was just all about Warrior.
He's like, how about I just do my clothesline gimmick and that's it.
Yeah, but the way Sid lays it out is much better.
Yeah,
it's like the babyface makes the heel starts off in control. The babyface makes the quick comeback. This is perfect for Warrior too, like in his style. And then the heel rolls out.
Yeah.
And then he said,
"It's great. It's very similar to the Warrior, Triple H thing, where Triple H always tells it that he has, he's doing that match with Warrior, WrestleMania 12 or whatever, and he shows up and he's got all these ideas, and this piece of paper that all these things, and Warrior kind of looks at it and goes, yeah, so what you're gonna do is that you're gonna hit me with your finisher. I'm gonna kick out, and then I'm gonna win. Then I'm gonna close the line you a couple times, and I'm gonna win in 10 seconds. So it's he's like, that's real good, kid. But here's what we're gonna do instead. You're gonna hit me with your finisher. I'm gonna kick out, and I'm gonna do my clothesline gimmick, and I'm gonna win in 45 seconds. And that's what Triple H had to do on that night.
So a typical Warrior, and Sid was just like, well, this sucks. And he didn't like working with him, and he found him hard to work for. And he said Warrior was real weird, and because Warrior is a weird guy.
Warrior's probably weird, yeah. Imagine Sid. Imagine a man as weird as Sid saying, "This guy's fucking weird. I don't want to be around this guy anymore." Because
people have to understand, the whole Sycho Sid moniker later was like ribbon on the square. Like,
yes,
everyone thought he was a lunatic. Like, they thought the guy was crazy. So anyway, he claims he walked out of the company because he didn't want to work with the Ultimate Warrior anymore. But yeah, you had the drug test failure and the suspension. Who knows what the reality is? What did the Observer report at the time in terms of why he really left?
They said that it was a failed drug test, but also disagreements about the Warrior thing, the matches with the Warrior thing, and I think just generally, like you said,
so maybe he wasn't lying then. He was
I think he said his spot sucked.
I
think he didn't want to work with Warrior, and nor should he. I mean, can you imagine Sid Warrior matches those could not have been any good?
Oh God, they had to be some of the worst matches in history.
Oh yeah, and he's probably looking around saying, "Wait, hold on a minute. I thought by this point I'd be winning titles."
Right, the Hogan program didn't. Yeah,
I'm done now. I'm done with Hogan, and I'm working with fucking Papa. Me and Papa Shango are working with Warrior, and this isn't what this is not what I signed up to do here.
So it's probably a combination of the Hogan program didn't work out the way it was pitched. He's about to get suspended for doing steroids, and he's working with this guy who he can't stand. So he's like, you know what, fuck.
Also, the summer was coming too, so I think maybe all those things, and the weather was getting nice, and he probably said, I don't need this shit. I'm gonna go play some softball and figure out what I'm gonna do in a little bit.
And for people who think that's just a bit,
no,
I mean,
it wasn't a bit.
Jim. There's times where I heard Jim Cornette tell a story where years later, this is when Jim Cornette was this is probably 97-ish, right? Where Sid would like call out sick of house shows and say, I can't make the town, brother, I'm ill. And then like Cornette would call the house and his wife would sell him out and be like, oh yeah, he had a softball tournament today. So this is like, the softball thing is real. Like
no. WCW in 1990, he's out for an injury. He's got a knee injury or whatever.
Quote unquote. Injury.
Yeah, and then Ole Anderson, sees him at a softball field or whatever. Yeah. He's just like, brother, I thought you have a knee injury. I do. He's just smacking dingers or whatever. And it's just like, all right, well, okay.
And again, he tried to work softball time into his contract with Jim Herd.
Yeah.
So it was a real actual thing. He would come up with injuries and illnesses and just any reason not to work. Certain months in the summer, even just selected dates. Like he just would not no-show the towns because he was playing softball somewhere. So anyway, he quits WWE, and then he makes a brief pit stop in Texas for Global, which is important because during that brief pit stop, he worked with the Ebony Experience, which was Booker T and Stevie Ray. Yeah. Before the Harlem Heat gimmick, it's basically the same gimmick. They were just called the Ebony Experience when they were in Global, and Sid took a liking to them, basically.
Yep.
And when he hooked back up with WCW in 1993, he's the one who got them the spot. So, and Booker T has never forgotten that, and he's always very quick to mention that. He writes about it extensively in his books. He talks about it anytime he has a chance. I'm sure he's brought it up this week with Sid passing, that if it were not for Sid, that maybe Harlem Heat never gets a shot with WCW, and maybe Booker T doesn't have the life that he has today. So Booker T has always felt a debt of gratitude to that for Sid getting him the spot. But this 93 run was an interesting run. The Masters of the Powerbomb gimmick with tag team with Vader. And again, bringing Harlem Heat into the fold and being aligned with them in story. He didn't just bring them in, like he was teaming with them when he first brought those guys in. The very unfortunate gimmick where they were wearing like the balls and chains, and they were implying that they were like Colonel Rob Parker's slaves. Wasn't that the deal at first? And it was just like, whoa, what the fuck are we doing?
Yep, in 1993. Yes. that's what they did. They had Colonel Robert Parker come out with two black men in chains. Yes, they did that in 1993.
A Southern man who talks like this,
right?
And whose gimmick?
My boys. Yeah. It's
and
like
gimmick is that he is straight off of a plantation. That's
come look at my boys. Like that's literally what he said. You're like, oh, it's 1993. What are we doing?
Doing here? So,
what?
They quickly backtracked that.
Yes. Somebody somewhere said, do we have another idea for these guys? Something else maybe.
Yeah. So and then they did the stuff with the infamous Beach Blast pay-per-view with the mini movie with the fucking midget and
also covered
up
flagshippatreon.com if you want extensive details about those. Yeah, and they're all readily available on YouTube as well. You have to watch, just incredible stuff. Sid and Vader with one of the most iconic images ever. Sid in his gear Vader in his wrestling gear, Colonel Rob Parker walking on a beach ready to confront Davey Boy Smith and Sting, before a midget in a motorboat explodes. It's fucking insane. WCW decided we're really getting our asses kicked by WWF. What can we do? How about we spend millions of dollars on these weird mini movies that might make people buy pay-per-views, and it didn't. Nobody bought extra pay-per-views.
Just atrocious. Suit Williams makes a great point in the chat. Ebony Experience is such a better name.
So good. Yeah, Ebony Experience rocks. Yeah, it's a great.
Especially since these men probably never have been to Harlem. They were from Texas.
I always found that kind of funny because then they would talk, and it was like, because now I think Booker's at this point, I think, gotten rid of a lot of his Texas accent. But when those guys first talked and Stevie Ray would open his mouth, you're like, that man is from Texas. That's a Southern man.
These men are not from New York. These men are not New Yorkers. So much better name. But the Masters of the Power Bomb against Sting and Davey Boy Smith at Beach Blast after the whole mini movie. And Ric Flair is obviously back in the mix. This is when he was doing the segments with Fifi, right? Like the interview segments. This is around the time they brought the Shockmaster in. So this was a very interesting time in WCW, this weird transition period in between like the cool, but the cool era in the post Dusty early 90s cool era of WCW, which couldn't draw, but it was really cool. And like the hardcores all liked it. And then you had this weird transition period in like 93 and 94 between that cool early 90s period and the Hogan era, right? And that's what like 93 is. It's kind of that weird transition time before Hogan shows up, where you have the Masters of the Power Bomb, and I guess the idea was for that team to split, and then Sid Vicious to finally win the WCW World Title for the first time.
Starrcade 1993. He was going to turn on Vader and face Vader for the WCW title and beat Vader for the WCW title. Finally, once and for all, Starrcade 1993.
Now, I know that's widely reported. And then obviously this is where Sid commits attempted murder on Arn Anderson, stabs him with the scissors in the hotel room, and gets fired. And then that's where they pivoted and went with Flair. And then Flair puts his career on the line against Vader, and he beats Vader instead. One reason why I'm a little dubious to this, okay? Why did Sting beat Sid at Halloween Havoc if Sid was going to win the world title a couple months later?
It's interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
Was that after the stabbing? I don't think it was.
No. He definitely did not work after the stabbing. They said, okay, that's enough for us.
Because the stabbing was in Europe, right?
Correct.
Halloween Havoc was before the European tour.
Yeah, the stabbing was October 27th. It's like 3 days before the so it is. You're right. You're right to think that might have been weird. But that also, it was 1993 WCW, so they were probably just being dumb about it. But you're right. It does seem odd that Sting would have beat him.
It's a weird booking call if the plan all along, because the idea was the plan all along was Sid was going to beat Vader for the title. And if that's the case, I don't understand Sting beating Sid. Is it some kind of G1 style booking where it's like, okay, well then Sid's going to win the title and he has a built-in program with Sting?
Maybe.
But like you're saying, 1993 WCW never thought that far.
No, they were dumb as fuck. So who knows?
Complicated. It wasn't like this wasn't 4D chess. I don't think. So either Sid beating Vader is just something that Sid has come up with that has become truth over the years, or this was just terrible booking. I mean, I don't understand. Like Sting, the thing about it is Sting would beat Sid like a drum going all the way back to like 90. Like Sting would always beat Sid.
Yeah.
And it's like, it would have been actually a pretty good move to have Sid finally beat Sting in a high profile match before winning the world title from Vader a couple months later. But the scissor fight put a stop to that, and they had to fire him. They didn't have a choice because he damn near killed a man. So he spends 1994 bouncing around. Memphis was always a place that he could fall back on, ever since he started there. And he did have a run in Memphis. I think he won their version of the world title during this run. Isn't that right?
Yes. Yeah. The unified world heavyweight title. Yeah.
Yeah. He did the program with Lawler. And this was during the period where WWF was sending people to Memphis. So it's a whole Mick Memphis thing, with Coco Beware and I'm trying to think, like Mabel, Owen Hart, Vince McMahon himself, you know, the forerunner to the Mr. McMahon character, like an early version of that. And Sid was just down there because he was between gigs, you know, and eventually he did end up back in the WWF in 1995, and this is the Sycho Sid run.
Right. He comes in as Diesel is now a babyface and the world champion or whatever. So Shawn Michaels gets a new bodyguard, and that's when Sid, as now Sycho Sid, enters the fold in February of 1995, and he's, you know, briefly with Shawn Michaels, and then the next night after WrestleMania, he turns on Michaels and, you know, has a little bit of a heel run where he joins the $1 Million Corporation. So he's managed by Ted DiBiase.
Yeah, and Vince's pitch to him was, I want you to come in and help me get Diesel over, and then we're going to do something with you with Shawn and all that. And, you know, obviously that sounded good to Sid because that meant he was going to be immediately a top guy, you know, working at the top of the card, making top guy money. So that was, I don't think he was he Sycho Sid right off the bat?
Yeah, he was Sycho Sid.
Okay, he
spelled
was.
with the S. SYCHO from day one. Yeah, 100%.
Right. So then, you know, he did the Diesel stuff. He did the Shawn stuff. He worked with Razor Ramon during that period too. So all the top faces. And then when we start to get into 1996, that's when does he finally win the world title? 96 or 97?
He wins 96. Survivor Series 1996 is when he defeats Shawn Michaels at Madison Square Garden. Yeah, the famous entrance where he comes out and he's just a fucking god in Madison Square Garden. You talk about the Northeast, the guy was just a god in the Northeast. Like, no matter what, no matter what company he was in, he was there.
Oh yeah.
And another, you know, great example of the company wanting the guy to be a heel, but the fans being like, this guy's fucking cool. And Sid not necessarily being the best guy at making the fans turn on him. And he just says, whatever. And just starts fist bumping everybody and going, who's the man? Who's the man? As everybody goes, yeah, you are. You're the man. You know, so then he beats Shawn Michaels. And that's the one where he grabs the camera and gives Jose Lothario or whatever a fucking heart attack or what, you know what I mean? It's you know, of course they had to overbook it and all that sort of bullshit, but it was all led to Royal Rumble, where he was going to lose his title back to Shawn Michaels.
Yeah. So that's his first world title, right? Unless you want to count the USWA gimmick, you know. So this is a guy who broke in to the major leagues in 1989, and everybody was like, this is going to instantly be one of the biggest stars in the business. And it really wasn't until late 1996 when one of these companies put a singles title on him, because WCW never put a title on this guy in those first two runs, right? I'm not forgetting one.
Not that I know of. I don't think he had anything. Yeah, no.
No, he, you know, they put titles on him in Continental, you know, and he won titles in Memphis, right? And it wasn't until that Survivor Series title win that he won his first title, period. Because the Skyscrapers never won any
they were never tag champs.
So it's kind of funny that no one ever, you know, was that lack of trust because he was a little flaky? Was it the idea that, well, look at him, he doesn't need a title, right? Maybe like, what's the point of putting the US title on this guy? Look at him. He's going to be over anyway, right? That could have been part of it. You know, it could have been, you know, WCW were saying that they were going to put the world title on him before he jumped the first time. So it may have happened a little sooner if he had chosen to stay with WCW instead of jumping to do the Sid Justice run. But it wasn't until the Sycho Sid run, and it wasn't until like well into a year into it that he actually won a singles title in WWF or WCW, which, you know, I think is notable. And then from there, he does win it a couple of times, right? Because he beat Bret Hart for
just
it.
one more time, actually. Just one more time, actually, because he beat Bret. He
didn't win the four-way, or when he won them wacky four-way. This is where this is your era. I get confused here. This is. So go ahead.
Bret Hart won that one. So no, we get Manic here. Before WrestleMania 13, we get Manic here, where Shawn has his injury, so he's got to go, and he can't lose at WrestleMania.
Lost the smile.
Yeah, got a massive knee injury that he was going to be out forever. Or
is this when he got beat up by the gaggle of Marines? Or is this
no. That was different time. That was 95. But this was he heard about the booking plans that he was going to lose to Bret Hart at WrestleMania and said, this knee injury. It's just,
right.
Man, this is awful. I got to be out for, I don't know, I could come back maybe a couple weeks after WrestleMania, but I'll be out through WrestleMania for sure. So they do the Final Four thing, Inner House Final Four. Bret Hart wins that. But then the next night, they have Sid face Hart for the title. And during that match, Hart's got Sid in the sharpshooter, and that's when Stone Cold Steve Austin comes out and hits Bret Hart with the steel chair, and Sid beats him and wins the title and wins it for the second time. And that's this place is bullshit. That whole Bret Hart promo, that's kind of the beginning of that. This is when Bret Hart snaps, completely. And this is when he's not full quote unquote heel yet. That's not going to happen until WrestleMania 13. But that's when he starts doing the work shoot stuff, and the beginning of him shoving Vince in the ring and saying, "This is bullshit. What's going on here?" That sort of stuff all kind of stems from him being like, "I'm getting screwed here. What the fuck's going on? How is this allowed? Why are you letting this happen?" It was all because of that. So that's how Sid won his second title, and then he goes to WrestleMania 13. And obviously has another WrestleMania main event. Against The Undertaker, a horrible match, just a fucking terrible match, and lose the title to The Undertaker. Yeah, just a horrific WrestleMania main event on a show that featured one of the best WrestleMania matches ever with Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin. But it was main evented by one of the worst WrestleMania matches you'll ever see, Sid and The Undertaker.
A lot of people probably think Bret Hart and Steve Austin was the main event of that WrestleMania, because that's the match everybody talks about. Right. Nobody talks about Undertaker Sid from that show. See, in my mind, this is where WWF started getting real goofy, and we're starting to lose me, lose my interest. My sensibilities.
Oh yeah,
you can only imagine.
I could jump in now. I could jump in now because this is when I was watching, in real time as a child. But I can imagine. Right.
Could you imagine Joe Lanza trying to enjoy this era of WWF?
The teenager writing into PW Torch does not strike me as the guy who was super into Attitude Era WWF. Yeah. So no.
Yeah, I hated Shawn Michaels with a passion. At this time, and all of this kind of booking, obviously. Look, I was born a grumpy old man, okay? So I didn't like any of this shit. I hated that we were headed toward it. And then once we got into the Attitude Era, that was when I was completely out. But anyway, in my mind, because I wasn't paying super close attention, and because the booking started to get so wacky, in my mind, Sid won this world title like a half a dozen times.
Yeah, just twice.
In reality, it was only twice. Yeah. So anyway, this run ended not long after the WrestleMania loss to The Undertaker.
Yeah, he got in a car accident, pretty bad car accident. A couple other roster members were in. I know Furnace and LaFon were in there, and I forget who the other guy was that was in the car, but it was a pretty nasty car accident. So he hurt his neck pretty bad, and he already had neck issues like every wrestler does. Every wrestler has bad necks. So he basically took off the rest of the year, and then they released him, and he never wrestled for WWF again until obviously the one appearance with Heath Slater. But basically by July of 1997, he's done, or June, July 1997, he's basically done with the company and off to ECW in another year or so.
Yeah, he settled back into Memphis, which again, Memphis was always there for him.
Always the landing spot if he needed it.
Like a lot of guys, Memphis was always there. And then that's when, he gets the call from Heyman, and, just the pops through the roof where he would come out and not even wrestle. He would just come out and powerbomb people. People think that the ECW run was they remember it as being longer than it was. He was only really there for 5 or 6 months. And he really didn't wrestle many matches. Now, Heyman put him on all the pay-per-views. And I think he agreed to pay him, according to Sid, something like $200,000 a year or $250,000 a year, which there's no way ECW was good. They were already struggling to pay. Heyman was struggling to pay the guys he was paying $100 a night at that point.
Yeah.
So the fact that he was promising Sid $250,000 a year. But people really have fond memories of this run for Sid because he was so fucking over.
Oh, so good. Yeah, and I wrote about this. I wrote about this run in my piece as well, because at that time too, ECW was kind of evolving into more of a work ratey, because your tippy top guys were all
purple
leaving.
logo era.
Right. Yeah, the purple era logo was now getting more into the Jerry Lynn and RVDs of the world. You know what I mean? Where it was like,
Tajiri.
Super crazy Tajiri out there. Like, this is the era of ECW that I remember pretty fondly, and I grew up of ECW thinking of it as like, hey, this is where really good wrestling happens, and that, you know, obviously wasn't always the case in 95, 96. You know, there was other reasons why ECW was very popular.
We're almost a half decade removed from. See, Heyman knew it was time to adjust slightly because times change. Hardcore wrestling was all the rage in 1995. It's now it's 1999 at this point. Right. And like you're saying, he lost a lot of that talent. The roster had turned over. And what did he have at his disposal? He had RVD, he had Jerry Lynn, he had Tajiri, he had
Lance Storm.
Lance Storm, all these guys. So yeah, and this was what people refer to as purple logo era ECW, where there really was a lot of great wrestling happening there. It's not that there wasn't any hardcore stuff anymore. That was still part of their ethos, right? That we're the rebels and we still have, but you're right. It did convert more to that. But as soon as Sid walked into these buildings, and this is where the meme began, where people were like, you know what? The ECW fans are hypocrites and full of shit. Because if the Undertaker dong ever bonged in the ECW arena, those people would absolutely lose their shit.
And Paul decided to check him on that and said, you know what? I bet that fucking Sid's going to come out and you're all going to fucking love it. And guess what? Sid came out and they all fucking loved it.
If the Undertaker dong ever would have hit on Swanson and Rittner, they all would have popped for that too. Let's be honest. So, Sid was over like a motherfucker. But basically just powerbombing people.
It didn't do it. It just came in and powerbombed Kronos and powerbombed Skull Von Crush or whatever. You know what I mean? Just
it was mostly angles. Like he didn't even do a lot of like real matches. And then but Heyman did put him on the pay-per-views. Obviously, you know, you're paying the guy $250,000 a year.
Well, paying him. You're promising to pay him. We should probably make a preference there. Promising to pay this man $250,000, but
well, that was the infamous incident at the Elks Lodge in Queens, New York, where there was a lot of problems here because here's what was happening. While Sid was under contract, quote unquote, to ECW, he was taking other dates, other indie dates and things like that. What Heyman, now as Sid tells it, Heyman was advertising him on shows that he was never officially booked on, and then fans were getting annoyed thinking that Sid was no-showing. That's how Sid tells the story. Okay, we don't know Heyman's side because Heyman doesn't talk about it. We all know what Heyman's doing. He's saving all this shit for the eventual book. That's what Heyman's doing because he doesn't talk about any of this ever. So all you ever hear is like the wrestler sides. So according to Sid, there were a lot of dates where he was advertised that he didn't know about, and he was working other indie shots. So that was a point of contention. And then there was the infamous incident at the Elks Lodge in Queens, New York, where Sid and Tommy Rogers, their checks bounced. And they weren't booked in Queens, but they showed up in Queens because they wanted their fucking money. So Tommy Rogers, who could be a hothead, okay, he wasn't hearing Heyman shit, and he basically was threatening him, and Heyman paid him cash. Heyman gave him cash right out of the fucking cash box from that night and paid off Tommy Rogers, and off he went. And I don't know if Tommy Rogers ever worked for ECW again. He probably didn't. I'd have to look that up. Sid, because he had the prior relationship with Heyman, said that, you know, as the story has, over the years, the story has been extrapolated to Sid and Tommy Rogers went in there, guns blazing, ready to fuck people up. Sid said it wasn't anything like that. Tommy Rogers might have been all fired up, but Sid just went there because Heyman wasn't answering his phone calls, which totally lines up with what everybody else says about Paul Heyman, where, you know, the guy just fucking disappears. He wasn't booking him anymore. He wasn't picking up the phone. And Sid just was like, hey, man, I need to tell you that this check bounced and I want you to pay me. He didn't demand cash. Heyman told him, all right, I'll write you another check and send it to your house. Sid agreed because he trusted Heyman. And he says he did get a check about a week later, and that check cleared. So Tommy Rogers got cash because he was threatening to kill people. And Sid just asked for another check, which he did get, but he never came back to the company. That was it. So that was the end of the Sid run in ECW. And from there, he ended back up in in WCW for his final run there.
And this is just a manic time that you probably have no recollection of, and I have, unfortunately, too much recollection of. But essentially, he comes into WCW, Great American Bash, 1999, joins Randy Savage's Team Madness stable, and they decide to do a Goldberg gimmick with him, where he's going to go on a winning streak. He's the Millennium Man, and he's going to have a win streak until the new millennium or whatever. But it's WCW in 1999, so of course they make it as fucking stupid and convoluted as humanly possible. So what he does is he comes out and he chokeslams somebody, and they go, another win for Sid Vicious. And they just kept adding, anytime he would come into the ring and beat somebody up, they would add that as a win. And then, a week would pass between Nitros, and he had gained 27 wins over the last Nitro. And like 5 weeks in, he was already 97-0. And it's like, what are we doing? Come on. You can't just have the guy just go out and beat people and say, wow, he's beating everybody. You know what I mean? Like, you could have just said, you could have legit done it and said, yeah, the man's 30-0. That's still pretty impressive, but of course it's WCW in 1999, so they had to make it fucking terrible. And he was also like losing on the house shows and in between, so anybody who went to a show would see the man lose, and then they'd go watch Nitro, and Tony Schiavone would say, he doesn't lose, he's 117-0 or whatever. So absolute dumb shit. But
according to Sid, he thought Vince Russo's shit was stupid, like everybody thought. I don't know if Russo was here immediately. I don't know when
Russo came in October of 1999, so he actually was the tail end of this.
Couple months before
this Millennium Man shit was believe it or not, Eric Bischoff and Kevin Nash. They won't ever tell you that they booked horrible shit in 1999, but this was still them doing this.
Well, Kevin Nash is the one who hired him, but Kevin and Eric hired him to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin and Eric, like I know them first name basis. They're the ones that brought him back, but Russo enters the scene at some point. I know that Sid's thoughts on Russo were that the guy's ideas were shit, but he had a conversation with was it Bill Bush? Is that the executive's name?
Yes, Bill Bush.
WCW suit.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Bush pulled Sid aside and he said, hey, look, a lot of people have a problem with this guy, but we hired him, we believe in him, we think he could turn this thing around. And basically Bush asked Sid a personal favor, and he was like, look, if you set an example, because everybody here seems to like you, you're a respected veteran. If you set an example and just carry out the marching orders and you put trust in this guy and what he's doing, that would mean a lot to me, because I think the rest of the roster will be influenced by you because they respect you so much. And Sid said, basically from that point on, he was like, all right, well, if the suits at Turner believe in me and they think that much of me, then I'm just going to go along with whatever this guy says, even though I think all of it's terrible. And, years on, with the benefit of hindsight, he thought it was all terrible too. So
right.
That was kind of Sid's thoughts on Vince Russo out of the mouth of Sid off of one of the shoots I watched the other day.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then he got caught up in a lot of the different stuff. Like he had the match with Benoit at with the early pay-per-view in 2000, and that's when Benoit was going to quit, so they put Sid's foot underneath the rope to have if Sid, because they weren't sure if Benoit was going to stay, so they gave him the title and said, hey, please stay. This is after Russo got fired, and Benoit and a lot of the other guys wanted to leave when Kevin Sullivan was going to get the book again. We talked about that, unfortunately, a couple weeks ago when Kevin Sullivan passed away, and to kind of give them an out, they had Sid put his foot under the rope just in case. They gave Benoit the title and said, now are you going to stay? Come on, you want to stay? And he said no.
Benoit also didn't get along with Kevin Nash. Who was in and out of the office, and so there was Benoit had problems with Nash, he had problems with Kevin Sullivan, so and Sid was kind of caught in the middle of all this shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, Sid, who's on good guy behavior at this point, pretty much realizing this is probably my last run as a major wrestler.
Absolutely, this is like this late stage WCW run is like good soldier Sid.
Oh yeah.
He's just doing everything that's asked of him. He's one of the as these big names keep dropping out and the company just gets deeper and deeper into the muck. Like, he's a constant presence on these shows, just out there working hard and doing what he's asked to do.
Yeah. So he gets caught up in a whole bunch of stuff, a bunch of dumb booking, and there's really nothing. This is where most of the comedy meme stuff of Sid comes, which is another thing too. There's a lot of people out here trying to Sid-splain me, and all they know of Sid is from fucking Botchamania. So it's like, come on, don't Sid-splain me. They know 22. Oh my God, 22. Moses, you idiot. Why me? Or his car gets crushed or whatever. Just a whole bunch of dumb shit.
I got half the brain. I've got half the brain you do.
Yeah. Stuff like that is how most of these fucking people are trying to Sid-splain me. That's how they know Sid. But so that's a lot of that era, and pretty much it all comes to a head at January. I think it's January 2001. I know it's Sin. I forget if it's January or February 2001. I think it's January 2001, and that's where he obviously has the horrific leg break, where he does the big boot from the top rope, which always seemed like, I'm like, what? When was that ever going to work? Like, how would that not be the result of doing that? Is having a giant man put all of his weight on one leg seems like a bad idea, and it was. So he suffered, obviously one of the most horrific, if not the most horrific injury. In-ring injury we've ever seen in a wrestling. Dante Martin's was pretty close, but I think Sid's one was right there too, where it's his tibia is basically snapped in half, and it's just like, holy fuck, that guy's leg is
grotesque.
It's going the opposite way. That's not supposed to do that. And Nitro, they were desperate for anything. They showed like numerous replays of this the next night on Nitro too. It's just like, come on, guys, Jesus Christ.
That was a Joe Theismann level.
Yeah,
break.
It
was one of those two. Napoleon, I always confuse Napoleon McCallum and Napoleon Kaufman. I think it was Napoleon McCallum who had one like that. There was one in college basketball. The kid on
Kevin
Louisville,
Ware.
Kevin Ware had one.
Mm-hmm.
That was a pretty brutal one. Didn't Paul George have a similar one, but not quite as bad?
Yeah, his was pretty bad. They just didn't have. They luckily, I think, recognized it pretty quickly, so we don't have a whole lot of like good clips of it or good videos of it. But yeah, his was pretty close to that. Yeah, maybe not as horrific.
Gordon Hayward.
Oh yeah. His ankle was going the wrong way. Yeah, and that was one where it was interesting too. They didn't notice. So they cut to him, and you could hear the announcers go like, "Oh no, oh god!" And then the camera cuts, and they're like, "Oh no!" We just showed the entire world because they just thought he landed on his ankle and kind of twisted it or whatever, and he's looking down at his ankles, going, "It's going the opposite way," and it's like, "Oh no, that's not supposed to happen." So
I got to tell you, I'm shocked it doesn't happen more often in football.
You would think.
I mean,
yeah.
You get a real bad one about once every half decade. I'm shocked it doesn't happen once every Sunday and every Saturday.
Yeah.
I mean, with the size of these guys and the
Alex Smith, I think he had the famous one where he nearly got his leg amputated too, because it's a fucking major injury. You just basically destroy the whole bottom half of your leg. So yeah, if you don't,
I mean, and in the case of Theismann and Sid, I mean, we're not talking ankles here. We're talking like the tibia snapping in half, and
the whole bottom half of your leg is snapped and going a different direction.
The other way.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the pain unless just the shock takes over and you don't feel anything. I don't know, but and in Theismann's case, it was like forwards, like Sid's is sideways. Theismann gets sacked by Lawrence Taylor, and it's like the bone snaps forward, and like his toes are touching his thigh. Yeah. Like it's disgusting.
I think his is the worst. Yeah, his might be the worst.
His is the worst, and that ended his career. I mean, he couldn't come back from that. Alex Smith eventually did come back, and in his first game back, he got sacked like twice by Aaron Donald of all people. And it's just, you're cringing. You're like,
right. Yeah, of all people.
Why is this man playing, and why is he's getting sacked by this maniac? There's one where there's a clip on YouTube. The one sack, Donald jumps on his back to take him down.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, no, like now he's carrying the weight of himself and a 280-pound fucking brick shithouse. This man's leg is not going to survive this, but it did. But I think he retired. I think he made it back. That was the goal, and then that was it for Alex Smith.
Yeah. But, there was that college football guy, too. I forget where he was playing, but it happened to him.
A more recent one than Napoleon McCallum. It was, you're right. It was a running back.
Who was that guy? No, I'm thinking of a quarterback. He eventually went to Florida State, but what the fuck was that guy's name? Someone in the Note Up chat was gonna figure it out. I forget where he played, but I remember he had a pretty horrific one, too. Someone will remember who it was. It was in the last 5 or 6 years.
Anderson Silva's a good one.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about his. Yeah.
And then his leg in slow motion is just flapping. He does the kick. The leg is just flapping in the breeze. Marcus Lattimore is the one I was thinking of. Good job out of Dakota Jones in the chat room.
I'm thinking of, someone's got it here. Mackenzie Milton in UCF. He, University of Central Florida. He is another one, too, where I think it was like needed to get amputated or whatever. That's when they went undefeated, remember, and they just decided we were going to call ourselves the national champions. I think that was UCF.
Good for them.
Yeah, they're like, well, I mean, we can't say we're not national champions, right? So
we didn't lose a game, and you're not letting us play.
All right, so we're fucking hanging a banner. We're hanging a banner.
Yeah, fuck you. Come take the banner down if you don't like it.
Right, come play. Come play with us.
Yeah, or let us play someone. Beat us by 60. Give us a chance. So that's it for Sid's major league career. He does some indies. He comes back in 2012 for the Heath Slater gimmick, like you noted. But really it's 87 to 2000, early 2001. It's basically a decade, and bouncing back and forth from WCW and WWE. When there'd be an incident, or he'd get fired or leave on bad terms and just bounce back to the other place. He was always going to get chances because of his incredible look, and he was a top guy. Look, he wasn't like a mega star where he could he never, where he was going to draw on his own. He could draw with somebody else. That's the best way I would describe it.
His draw record is not.
It's sketchy as hell.
Not great,
especially he never met his potential in terms of the level of star that people thought he was going to become. He wasn't like a terrible draw, but he seemed to be in these companies during times when they weren't hot either. That's the other thing, early 90s WCW. I mean, we all know the story there, and then, WWE when he goes there in like 92, and then 1993 WCW, and then he's in WWF right before the Attitude Era, right? And then he's gone for the Attitude Era, and then he's in WCW in 99 after they cool off in 98. Like he was
always in the wrong part. He was always in the wrong company at the wrong time. And there's a funny thing too, where he's like, all the iconic wrestling video games in the 90s, he's in like none of them, because he's always like the worst, he's not in WCW NWO World Tour. He's not in WCW versus the World. He's not in WCW NWO Revenge, because he's technically in WWF at that time. But then he switches over, but that's when WCW loses the license, and then he's in those shitty WCW games that they have, and he's not in WrestleMania 2000 or No Mercy or whatever. So he's just always in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Backstage assault.
Yeah, he's in Backstage Assault and Mayhem is what he's in.
Right. Yeah. So he just he missed all the hot periods, and it's hard to draw when a company's not hot, no matter who you are. And it's. But he was always a top guy, and I wouldn't call him like. It's tricky. I don't know if I'd necessarily say he was always a major flop. I don't know if that's how I would describe him. But he never popped a territory or popped a company. But he did work with the top guys because he's Sid, and look at him, and you were always going to give him a million chances and a million opportunities to do so. But there's so much revisionism with him and sort of retconning his career. And it began before he died. This isn't like a death thing. I've seen a lot of this in recent years, and it's probably coming from people who were kids who were really impressed with him in real time, who are now adults who have opinions on the internet. So, you forget that, he won, readers' least favorite wrestler in the Observer Awards, but later on in his career, not in the early 90s, but sort of that mid 90s run, I think. And he was in the worst match of the year at least once or twice. And I know he won most overrated, which is the most overpushed award.
Yeah, 93.
Probably again 93. See, it wouldn't have been in 89 to 91, because that's when everyone was super hopeful that this guy was going to be the next big thing. No one thought he was overpushed in those years. They thought he should be a potential future world champion. But then it's like the shine kind of comes off of Sid after a while, and it's like, how many terrible matches can you see? And how many times can he flake on a promotion? And how many times can he leave a promotion on bad terms? But then he would get the reset when he showed back up in the other place.
Because he was fucking Sid. It was like, God damn, This is the time. We got to do something with this guy. This is the time we're going to do it. And then,
and you'd get excited about him again, and it's like, but let's not try to rewrite history here. This, challenge someone to name 10 of their favorite Sid Vicious matches. I mean, that's not what he was. And we don't have to pretend that it is because that's not what he was.
Right. It's okay.
He was a vibes guy. He was it's what we call today a vibes guy. That's what he was. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. For all the reasons we talked at the top, he didn't have that facet of being a great pro wrestler. He didn't have the work. He doesn't have a litany of great matches. He's Sid. He'd get in there, and if it was a squash, he'd power bomb you in 2 minutes and beat you. If it was a house show match, he'd get in there and be out in 7-8 minutes, and usually do the job when he was a heel, at least. Getting beat like a drum by Lex Luger and Sting, or, going to WWF and, beating Undertaker on the early run, but then losing when he was a heel to guys like Undertaker and the Ultimate Warrior. But he's not a guy with a litany of great matches or anything like that. He's a vibes guy who cut intense promos that matched his look and persona. And, he had the quiet and then loud, quiet and then loud.
Oh, the promos. Yeah, the best. I'm the master and ruler of the world. Yes.
Right, master and ruler of the world. And look, some of his promos were downright atrocious.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Like,
but it worked. I don't want him to have slick promos. You know what I mean? Like
some of them were great though. Some of them were intense and it totally matched what he was supposed to be. But when he was having a rough night, hey, look, we're live, pal.
We're live, pal. Yeah.
When he's having his promos were really bad. And he had the quiet, loud thing, which is funny because it's kind of how like music was during the early 90s, like all of those pre-grunge bands like Pixies and Meat Puppets, which were the influence of bands like Nirvana, who later, brought the quiet and then loud thing to like mainstream music, right? They got that from Pixies and all those bands. And that's like, it's funny because that's like right around the same time when Sid is coming up, late 80s, early 90s. And his promos were kind of the same way as the music was at that time in a lot of ways, which I always found interesting. As a parallel, but yeah, this is not a guy with any kind of litany of fucking great. You don't remember fucking Sid's matches. You remember Sid's, like you're saying, in that singlet on one knee, egging on the crowd to cheer him. You remember that. You remember him powerbombing people through the ring. You remember the promos. You remember that great look. You remember the entrance at Survivor Series.
Or his goofy moments. A lot of people remember his goofy moments too. He was just as, famous for being goofy too, having, fuck ups and having goofy different things. You know what I mean? Like that. And that's a big part of, I think, why the maybe the retconning, like you said, is kind of turned around, is that we now laugh at the goofiness and say, oh, that's kind of funny. But at the time, people were frustrated by it. You know what I mean? Like at the time, promoters and fans were kind of frustrated that this guy that felt like he should be the next biggest thing in wrestling is sometimes kind of a goofball, unintentionally a goofball, because he's just, sometimes he just fucked up. Yeah. And it was funny.
And that's why he started racking up negative awards and the dirt sheets and everything, because the smarks of the day and the hardcore fans of the day and the people inside the business of the day, I assure you, this guy, it's like the luster wore off very quickly.
Yeah. And
he was considered a terrible worker. If you think Rich's headline was bad, you should hear how the people in the business would talk about him. You should hear, right. You should see how he was written about by, in
read any book from anybody, any former wrestler. Read Bret Hart's book. Read, and you'll see.
Yeah, and look, and he doesn't have nice things to say about Bret Hart or Ric Flair either. No. But ask those people what it was like to work with him. The one thing they appreciated is he worked light, and he never hurt anybody for a guy his size. But that, he was difficult to work with from the standpoint of you couldn't do a lot with him. The same complaints he had about El Gigante are the same complaints that everybody else had about him, and he was not an athletic guy. He was not an athlete in high school or college. He was just a big dude who was a bodybuilder. And in that era, it worked. And he was just athletic enough, even though he wasn't athletic at all. Right, he was just not quite enough of a putz and enough he didn't quite cross the line of being too clumsy to where he could find a way to make it work and be a top guy in the wrestling business. But the retconning has gone a way too far with this guy. I mean, and it's weird because obviously, you wrote about how fond you are of watching him in his career, and I don't know if I was ever as big of a fan as Sid as you were. I'm a little older than you. I was already deep into smartdom. So I was someone who was like, oh, this guy looks great. And I love that initial run, but it wore off with me too. By the mid to late 90s, I had enough of Sid. I was moving on to other people because Sid was what he was, which was just a guy that looked the part, but couldn't really ever sustain it, sustain himself in the role. But yeah, a fascinating figure in pro wrestling for about a decade, and a guy with an all-time look, an all-time aura, and an all-time vibes guy. That's how I would describe Sid.